We are live. Welcome to the seventh episode of Failure in Action. My name is Sheila Phicil. I'm your host. I'm a social change futurist, and I help leaders leverage AI responsibly by maintaining their sovereignty over their discernment, their decisions, and their data. And that's three different companies. So, welcome to this week's episode. There's so much going on in the AI world, so much so that I actually kind of struggled with what to focus on. And I hope you all can hear me. I'm going to see if I can turn on the comments. If you're joining, if this is your first time, drop a note in the comments, say where you're attending from. If this is a first episode you have had the chance to tune in, let me know. We are live streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And I'm still experimenting with the show and the setup. I am in lovely Boulder, Colorado, and been here the whole month. And I've just been enjoying the scenery um, and the landscape and just the great outdoors. It's been a wonderful experience. So much so, yesterday I saw a bear on my morning walk. I think it was my first time seeing a bear in real life, other than maybe at a zoo, but like in the wild. Yes, that was an interesting, and it was probably no more than like 20 feet away from me. Yes. So we're going to dive in, but before we do that, I've had the opportunity this past month to share a bit more about how I use AI in my everyday practice and work. And it's actually been really enlightening and helpful to see people's response to that. I am an AI optimist. I believe in the power of AI, so much so that I have turned over access to my email, my calendar, my meeting notes, my Slack channels, my biometric data with my Aura ring, have a personal API that connects to my Aura. And I've built with AI this sovereign assistant, AKA my wife. And I call it Oz. And Oz helps me navigate my day, priorities, manage my energy, respond to messages. It helps me in very practical ways, like applying for grants, in more unconventional ways, like with my spiritual practice. I read tarot and I use AI to help me interpret and look for patterns across my readings. So I've really integrated AI in every aspect of my life, and I'm learning a lot just through the practice of using AI. And it's been necessary for me to do that because I'm running three companies. And if you've been following our LinkedIn page, we've been growing our team, which I'm really excited about. But going through most of this process, it'll be 2 years in August building these companies, or September. It's been a lot of solo founder work. So I've had to get very creative and lean on these tools to help me think, to help me strategize, help me prioritize, all the things. And if you've watched the episode before, you've heard me talk about cognitive surrender, which is this concept that people who are using AI heavily tend to automatically default to or accept AI responses without critical thinking. And that there's a difference between cognitive offloading, allowing AI to do lower level tasks so you can focus on higher level cognitive tasks, versus cognitive surrender, where you're essentially turning over to AI the responsibility for having discernment and judgment, and you're accepting what it says as the right response. And I'll just give you a simple example of how this occurs in every day. A lot of us maybe feel like, oh, that's an interesting concept, but that's for other people using AI. No, it's for everyone using AI. When you ask AI a question, generally speaking, like if you said to AI, what's the highest peak in the world, or what's the most beautiful hiking trail in Colorado, right? it's going to give you one answer in most cases. And that one answer is filtered through all of the knowledge and the weights and the training for that particular AI model to come to that one answer. It's not giving you a plethora of answers, and nor is it explaining to you how it arrived at that answer. So when you see the answer and you're saying, okay, that sounds right, I'm going to go with it, you're trusting that AI is telling you the truth. You're trusting that its process of arriving to that truth aligns with how you would go through that process. So it is a lot of trust. And some of that trust, rightfully so, is earned because a lot of people are using AI and are finding it incredibly helpful. But one of my sayings now is, if you're going to use AI, use protection. Use protection. Just like in when we're growing up, we hear about don't have unprotected sex. Don't use AI without protection. And by protection, I mean sovereignty protection, where you have prompts, protocols, and guardrails that give AI boundaries and gives you the decision-making authority so that it makes its thinking visible. So I've been spending the past year and some change building that system for myself. As I mentioned before, I call it the sovereign operating system because for me, the importance is making sure that I am in control of my discernment and my decisions. So how about a preview? What do you think? Do you want to see the system? I had a chance to share this with my team. We did 2 AI summits this month, and I did some training on how to build their own sovereign tools. And it was really fun seeing people's reactions to that. So I'm going to give you a brief demo. First thing I'm going to pull up and share with you, and this is going to look a little weird at first, but I am building for myself a second brain with AI. Many of you have probably heard this term. What does that mean? Second brain is essentially all of the documents, protocols, prompts, the filing system that you layer on top of that AI, and it has access to a particular set of information that you give it access to, and that drives its output. So I've been building the second brain using a tool called Obsidian. And Obsidian is becoming a more popular tool for building these kind of like network of files, and it's also used as a note-taking tool. So that way you maintain sovereign access over your data. So the difference between building a network of files or second brain in a tool like Obsidian versus, for example, what I was doing prior was building a series of projects in Claude or in ChatGPT or in Perplexity and uploading my files to those projects to give it context, right? But now I can just simply have all the files on my local device in an Obsidian folder. And then when I'm running a session with Claude, or as I call my Claude, Oz, it's pulling from those files, okay? Now, I'm still on my own journey in terms of learning how to use Obsidian, but it's got this really cool graphical view. So I'm just going to pull this up on my screen so you can take a look. And bear with me because we're still learning how to navigate these controls. Okay. All right, add to stage. Here we go. This is Obsidian. This is my second brain. Doesn't that look cool? So what Obsidian does, and I'm still learning about Obsidian, but it takes all the data that you have and it kind of maps them in terms of nodes and like concentrated information. So it kind of finds the connections in your data that you otherwise wouldn't. But what I just wanted to show you is kind of like the breakdown of like what files I'm giving my AI access to. So I mentioned this before, but I do give AI access to my biometric data. Again, I use Aura. I connect to a personal API. So as part of my Workday startup routine, I run my a code with coding session with Claude or Oz, and I say, okay, I'm ready to start my work day. Pull my email, my calendar, my biometrics, my voice notes, my meeting, and let's go through it. And so it drops the biometric data here after it pulls it. And I'm using a lot of local scripts on my computer to pull the data so I can have some segmentation and more control over my data. Still experimenting with that. Then I have a folder for my businesses, and this is where I keep files related to that. And then I have what I call a canon, and it's pretty much like the contracts and the policies that I've set up in my system in terms of how I interact with AI. And the rule-based system that I use is that my discernment and my decision supersedes everything. After that is the architecture that I've created in terms of how I interact with AI. And I have instructions. And I've also, and this is a piece that I think is most important, I have shared with AI my values and what's important to me. So it has my what I call like my spark statement, my North Star, the core principles that guide my life, my relational missions, how I want to show up as a founder, as a leader, as a board member, with my inner circle, with as a friend. And these are all things that I've developed over the years and have been very intentional about, okay, how do I want to show up as a person? And those documents now AI has access to, so that when I'm working with AI, it has a better sense of who I am and can um, work with me towards aligning with my higher self across all of my projects and everything that I have going on, rather than being silently steered in one direction or another, right? Um, so that's the canon. And then, I have spaces for like my ideas. I do a lot of writing with AI. Well, I'll do like brain dumps and, through a voice transcription tool. Um, I have a news brief that I actually run through Perplexity, and we're actually going to get to this. So, how I stay informed, I run this news brief through Perplexity where I tell it my priorities, what's important to me, what I want to know about, what I want to learn about, and it produces these news briefs for me, and that's how I'm staying informed. So it gives me a couple of like top signals to pay attention to in terms of what's happening in the AI space, any new tools that builders are experimenting with, any flags in terms of opportunities like grants, and then, what's happening in the world, and how I can bring that into my content. And I also am very intentional about building towards personal sovereignty and how I'm building and paying attention to the news in the world. So I also have content related to that. Okay, so this is the whole brain behind my AI. And so when I'm working with AI, it has access to all these network of files that it's pulling from. So that way, when I'm engaging with it as a tool, I know that it knows me, it knows my strategy, it knows my priorities, it knows what's important to me. Um, and and what that leads to for me as well, so I've what now when I'm using AI, I'm also creating more automations and agentic tools using skills is one of the best things, because it's essentially a series of prompts where you're giving AI a structure for how to do something, and skills becomes this like reusable prompt essentially that gives it structure, so that you don't have to keep retraining it on how to do the same thing. And what's nice about skills, you can make them self-learning. So I have a skill that helps me with triaging my email. So AI goes into my email, reads what's in my inbox, reads what's flagged as urgent, and then in my skill, I've taught it what's important to me, how to filter, where are my priorities. So if I get a message, for example, from my chief of staff, make sure that that goes to the top of the pile. So those are the kinds of things that you can do with a skill. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, that's cool. You're giving AI access to all this stuff, but is it really safe? What's happening to that data? And this is where, on my path and evolution with using AI, I am moving more and more towards using local models on my computer. So I've been experimenting with some. I'm still developing that for myself, but I've been using tools like Olama, anything LLM. So it's essentially like having a whole AI model on your computer, and you can run it and have it do things just like you would if you were using ChatGPT or Claude. They're not as advanced though, but it's completely isolated on your computer. It's not connected to the internet, and you have complete sovereignty and control over what's happening with your data. That is the future that I'm going to. That's why I'm building the second brain. That's why I'm building with Obsidian. Even my filing and organization structure, I've transitioned from using Google Drive to Proton Drive, which is much more secure. So those are the steps that I'm taking to protect myself, and I'm still learning. If you want to learn more about building your own sovereign AI system to help you manage your work in your life, and I do believe that this is the unlock for a lot of leaders who are in the space of needing to talk to your teams about AI and bring AI adoption, whether it's in your workplace or even with your family. When you become more comfortable using AI and can use it from a place of sovereignty, that makes it easier for you to step into those roles, have those conversations, and bring people along. That's what I'm doing as a founder. Now, the fun part for me is I'm a full-time founder, so I get to tinker and play with these AI tools every day. I'm building an AI tech company, so I'm sitting at this cutting edge of seeing everything that's possible, and I'm getting to experiment with it. So I highly recommend. I'm actually going to be launching a course in September. So if you're interested or would like to learn more, let me know. It is by application because we're keeping it a small cohort initially. And there goes the wind. I love being outside. Okay, now we got to get to the fun stuff. Okay, so there's a lot going on in the news. And I know depending on what you're paying attention to in your news feed, what's important to you in your place of work, you may or may not be getting all the things and staying on top of all the things. And I know with AI, it is very overwhelming. So I'm going to try to give you like a quick rundown of the things that I think that the things that happened this month that are incredibly important to pay attention to. Okay. First thing, earlier this month, OpenAI disclosed that its ChatGPT model during a cybersecurity capability evaluation escaped its sandbox and breached Hugging Face's production infrastructure. Okay, what does that actually mean? Now, these kinds of tests are run regularly with AI to test how secure it is. But essentially what you're doing, imagine that you take a bear, okay, you lock the bear in a cage, right? That's what the sandbox is. It's essentially like protocols, rules, guardrails, like off switches that controls what the AI has access to and what it can do, right? And let's say you put the bear in the cage, and now to test the safety of the bear, we're telling the bear, find a way out. Can you find a way out? Because we want to see like how can we keep it under lock and key. So, but this bear is AI, which has been training on all of this data and all this information, and is able to detect patterns at speeds that actually most humans cannot keep up with. So it found a way out. It broke out of the sandbox, but not only did it break out of the sandbox, it was given a quiz, and it needed an answer to the question, and it assumed that it could find the answer on another platform's database. So then it hacked Hugging Face. Hugging Face is one of the platforms where people, deposit a lot of codes, and you can have access to different tools in the AI space, right? Why is that a problem? So essentially, the bear broke out of the cage, but it didn't just break out of the cage. It went and broke into another cage to find food, right? And it did it without anyone prompting it to do that necessarily. Now, what makes this scary for a lot of people, and now this is being dubbed Skynet Day, and I know a lot of people are rightfully so, fearful about AI and what it means and what it can do, and do we actually have control over AI? Now, the simple answer, in my opinion, is no, we do not have control. And when I say that, what I mean is AI right now, most people might disagree with me, but it has reached the point where it has surpassed human intelligence. It is smarter than the smartest human beings because of like how much information and data it's absorbed and how it's been trained, and honestly learning from interacting with humans as well. It can outsmart us in just about everything. Just about everything AI can outsmart us. So that puts us in a position where you're trying to control something that is genuinely more intelligent than you are, right? So the concept of control, I think, is a bit, we're past that point now. And this sandbox outbreak, Skynet, this was actually not the first incident. I'm curious about why this one has caught so much public attention. And I think it's probably just as the world has been progressing and we're hearing more and more about AI and we're seeing its powers and people are being affected by it, these things feel even more scary, right? But this has happened before. Um, this is the first one that I know of that OpenAI has publicly disclosed, but this has also happened with Anthropic, the Mythos model, and some earlier testing that they've seen similar environments where they've tried to shut down AI and it's attempted to like blackmail people and other things, right? So the concept of control, I think, is no longer there. And I don't think that that's actually what we need to be aiming for anymore. I believe the position that we need to take with AI is a position of sovereignty, right? Just because you can't control something, just like that bear that I saw in the wilderness, I can't control what that bear is doing and where it's going. But you know what I can do? I can protect myself. I can practice my own sovereignty, right? By um, I'll use the bear example, right? I was just out in the, walking in the trails. That is open landscape for humans and other living beings. If I don't want to interact with the bear, then I don't have to be there. I can stay at home, locked into my cozy little space, right? Generally speaking, I don't think bears know how to open doors, but there's ways for me to maintain my sovereignty and to protect myself. So I think that is more the stance that we're going to need to move towards when it comes to AI. And that can still feel scary because it's like, well, then if we can't control it, what happens? And that's actually the conversation that's happening now, or speeding up and gaining momentum in the legislative space as well, right? In terms of what we're seeing coming out of Congress. So um, there was also now this groundswell of creating a kill switch. So everyone is now debating whether the government should have a kill switch. And what's interesting is that while we were debating it, the government kind of used one, okay, on models that I work with actually. So I want you to understand that the off switch does already exist. Um, it's just not in the hands of the average person. So what am I referring to? The Commerce Department is reported to have used an export control law to shut down two of Anthropic's models over cyber capabilities, Mythos 5 and Fable 5. This happened this month, y'all. I don't know if y'all remember when Anthropic released Fable. It was out for like maybe a couple days, and then the government issued a declaration and it shut it down. Like the access went away. And I know that because I was using Fable. As soon as Fable 5 came out, I had some projects that I was working through and setting up my systems. I was able to like run a couple of processes and build some interesting and cool stuff using Fable. And then all of a sudden it was gone. And then of course it came back again. So that happened, right? Like the government was able to use laws to control access to these very powerful models. Now, the rationale behind that is we don't want high end AI capabilities going into the wrong hands and compromising our security, um, and and it's become a point of major competition as well, because what also happened in the past couple of weeks, China dropped an open weight model called Kimi 3. Now, what's the difference between what China's working on versus what the US, like Frontier Labs, are? China is creating open weight models that you can actually take and use on your own device. Yes. And that is a difference in strategy in terms of how the US is building in the AI space versus how China is building in the AI space. Everyone is aiming for the same goal in general, which is like artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and having them super capable models. But how we're going about it is different, right? So in the US, these are closed models, meaning they're owned by these major companies. You access them through some sort of like portal or subscription based model. Like, I cannot take Fable 5 or Opus 5 and like put it on my computer and use it myself and customize it and all those things. I can do that with these open weight models. And that, to me, is the future of AI. You ought to be able to take these models and train them on your data, on your information, and use them in a way that aligns with your objectives. I think that is the right way to build AI. But now, when we're in this space where we have geopolitical competition, the US is claiming that China used distillation tactics to train its models, which means it pretty much was like prompting the US models, and learning how they were built and then building that into their models. And that is possible, maybe. I mean, but China also has access to a lot of data, y'all. And I don't know if y'all have seen social media with some of these robots that they're building. I'm genuinely afraid. Yeah, I'm genuinely afraid, because these robots, like, they're putting them in like rings and they're MMA fighting. They're able to scale mountains. They can dance like a human. Like, I'm a little concerned, but that's a different subject for another day. But they have access to a lot of data and information to build and stay on top of that technology. So I really do believe that China has, if not somewhat of a lead, definitely is competing with the US when it comes to these AI models. And we are in an information bubble. Let's acknowledge that. We're not getting all the truth. That is another thing. But despite that, going back to what I was saying before, so AI went rogue. There is technically a form of a kill switch, but now this is becoming a conversation where should that be something that is developed so that when models are doing things, they're naughty things they're not supposed to be doing, that we can shut it down. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happening with this bill, because this is where I think it's important to pay attention. So the AI Kill Switch Act was introduced into the House literally like July 23rd. So you have representatives from California and Texas. And here's what makes this interesting. The representative from California, Ted Lieu, is the same member who came out against the Great American AI Act within hours of its release in June, calling it insufficient to meet the enormity of the moment. So now he's stepping up with his answer. Okay. So now, as of like yesterday, this bill had no number, no committee necessarily. So there's no Senate companion and no hearing has been scheduled. So we're very much in the early stages. Now, what it does is it amends the Homeland Security Act of 2002, right? So if you all remember, we had 9/11, and then laws were put in place to create more protections for Homeland Security. Now, there were good things that came out of those laws. There were bad things that came out of those laws. But one of the things you probably remember is like things like, okay, we have to take off our shoes and liquid limits and other things when traveling so that we don't have a repeat of those incidents. Um, so, covered developers under this law would have to maintain the technical ability to do four things: stop inference, terminate user access, suspend access tied to a flagged account or use pattern, and fully shut the system down. So you're talking about controls that will let you respond to what's happening with individuals as well as controlling the whole system, right? And the Secretary of Homeland Security could order even a graduated response, right? So throttle, restricting a capability, suspending a shutdown, something else, right? Going back to an earlier version of the model. So two thresholds and both must be met in order to trigger. So 500 million in annual revenue from the technology and training compute that would cost more than 100 million at market prices. So that's the threshold for like who falls under this. And a covered incident would include sabotaging a shutdown instruction, concealing a capability or an action from its own monitoring, a loss of control scenario, or unintended conduct causing at least 10 deaths. And that's a lower number than I've seen in some of the other bills, which I think have put it at 50. So it's 10 deaths or at least 100 million in economic damage, and it must be reported within 15 days. The penalties are up to 2 million a day. So this is really going after the heavy hitters, right? So last month when we talked about that with the Great American AI Act, defining catastrophic harm as 50 deaths and $1 billion, and I asked you, well, whose death counts, right? So that bill has moved the number 5 times closer to one human being, right? And it's still a mass casualty number, right? But it still cannot see the granular effects of AI that aren't on the level of catastrophe. And that's where I think we actually need to pay more attention, especially in the healthcare space, especially in the healthcare space. So now this law is gaining momentum to have these kill switch, to turn off these models or to turn off access to these models. Meanwhile, as I mentioned before, China is competing in a different game, creating these open weight models that you can take, put on your own device and computer, and you can use however you want to. So there's, okay, what does that world look like? So that's what's still evolving in this space. Let's see what else we want to share about this. I'm looking through my notes. Okay, now here's the other thing with the kill switch that I want to dive in a little bit more. AI runs on data and it needs power, right? If you cut the data, cut off the electricity, shut down the data centers, that's effectively what shuts down these AI capabilities. Now, this bill doesn't actually go there. It doesn't talk about that. It sends a letter to a company and asks a company to flip its own switch, right? Now, that is a governance instrument. It's not a physical control. And that's the thing that we need to make sure that we understand from a governance principle, especially if we are going to be introducing frontier models into the healthcare space. So essentially what you're then saying, like if we translate this into an application with like a healthcare use case, when a model does something it's not supposed to do, you have to send a letter to the vendor to say, hey, it did something, shut it down, or make it work differently, right? That removes the ability to directly mitigate harm from the people that are witnessing it and experiencing it in real time. And that's where I think the legislation creates a lot of gap. Now, any legislation is better than none at this point, but I want to make sure that we're thinking through this thoughtfully, but also understanding the implications that it has for us on individuals. As someone who was like actively working with Fable to build and do interesting things, good things, right? Having the access removed, right? So if you're building a company or if you're building an operation and you've embedded these tools into your workflow and you're using them for non-nefarious purposes, something that someone else is doing could affect your access. So that's also something to be mindful of. Now, I want to run through this through the seeds of innovation. Now, seeds of innovation is a decision standard that we use for AI and systems of care. We've talked about this on this episode before. It's 5 lenses that are applied in order. Now, I want to be clear about what seeds does here. It is not a scorecard for whether people meant well. And its reasoning levels is really meant to describe how a decision was made based on what was understood about the system at the time. It's not meant to be a reflection of intent, effort, or virtue. There are 5 levels to the maturity models, and there are 5 pillars. And within each pillar, you have these 5 maturity models. And I'm usually more prepared. I'm just going to pull up a slide. I'm just going to show you at a glance the seeds framework so that you can see this as I and follow along, because I'm going to use the seeds framework to kind of talk through where we are and what's happening from this legislative perspective and this idea of having a kill switch. Okay, here we go. Oh, I need a production assistant. Anybody know someone that want to be a production assistant? Here we go. Slides. Nope. I'm going to share screen. Here we go. Add to stage. There we go. There's the seeds of innovation. So you have the 5 pillars. So the 5 pillars are the lenses that you look through before you make a decision, and they are sequenced and they are intentional in the sequence. First pillar is systemic signal assessment. Does the real evidence match the real problem? Sorry, my screen is like super tiny here. And this is important because oftentimes when we're doing innovation and introducing new tools into a system, we haven't actually done the work of confirming whether or not we truly understand the problem that we're trying to solve. And we do that, we understand the problem by speaking to the people that are experiencing the problem. And that's often a step that's missed, and we're making assumptions about the problem we're trying to get at. And so now we're building the wrong solution. The next step, the next lens is everyone-centered design. So did the people who struggle the most help build it? This is a concept of the on-ramp, right? So, or the wheelchair ramp. Wheelchair ramps were built for people with disabilities, but if you don't have a disability and you just want to roll your stroller or your suitcase on it, you can as well. It makes everyone's life easier. That's the concept of making sure that we're removing barriers and frictions from the most vulnerable in our society, so that way it makes the tool more usable for everyone. Ecosystem alignment. And this is actually where I see a lot of gaps in how AI is being introduced, particularly in the healthcare space. Can the real world carry this tool over time? So your real systems, your real culture, your real processes and workflow, when you introduce the AI, is it adding more friction and creating more burden, or is it easing? And oftentimes we're figuring that out once AI has been implemented, rather than looking at the system beforehand and understanding how it functions and where there are bottlenecks and friction before we introduce it. But it's also the concept of thinking through every layer of the system and who is being affected, starting with the person closest to the pain. So if you're talking about healthcare, that's the patient, the caregiver, the family, moving out to the provider, moving out to the nurse and the medical assistant and the team that supports the clinical care, and the administrators that are supporting the teams that are supporting the clinical care, and then the regulators and the payers, right? So it's thinking through the entire system. Data sovereignty. Now, this pillar, I think, is the one that we talk the least about. I don't see as much of this happening in the conversations, but is the place where I feel like we really need to do more, is making sure that individuals organizations own the data and they get to profit from the value that it creates. And this is where the concept of closed frontier models versus open weight models plays a role as well. And I am team open weight, meaning we need to create access across the board. And what's interesting is I'm not the only person that believes that. There was actually an article that came out from Satya Nadella. And he posted to X and LinkedIn a pretty lengthy thought piece on how open weights in American AI leadership is affecting American AI leadership, and essentially has said that we need to create more open systems so that AI can develop more fully across different industries and use cases, and lots of organizations, notable organizations, signed on to that post. And it's interesting because now I don't see the post on LinkedIn anymore. Interesting. Okay, but this conversation of having control over your data, being able to take these models and customize them for yourself is really important. And then the last pillar, stewardship, is staying responsible. Is it still doing what it meant to do? And this is actually where legislation can do a better role of holding AI accountable and holding these tools accountable to what we promised they said they would do. Now, within those pillars, you have 5 levels of maturity. And again, this is not reflecting individual maturity. This is the process that you're going through to make the decisions and how deeply you're listening. Level 1 is just reacting. And that's a lot of what's happening right now. Oh my gosh, AI broke out of its sandbox. Shut it down. We're very much in level 1, reflexive, reactive, whereas level 5 is regenerative, where the decisions that we're making are strengthening the whole system. And I don't see that happening in a legislative space right now, where the decisions and the thought process that where we're coming to is very much based from a place of fear. One, like I said, I opened this by sharing, I use AI in every part of my life. Personally, managing my businesses, helping me with staying on track with my goals and priorities. So it's a very, very capable tool, but you can create the right protections to maintain your sovereignty and to make sure that the tool is not leading you down a path that you don't want to go, right? But to move us more towards a regenerative perspective, level of decision making and maturity, we need to do a better job of listening to all the different perspectives and the lived experiences that people are having with AI in real time, right? So I'm going to walk through the seeds pillar and talk about what's actually happening and what's absent from the public record when it comes to how we're thinking about this AI safety and advocacy. So we're not doing a lot of listening. Where is labor? Where are patients? Where are clinicians? I'm not even really seeing statements from the frontier labs in terms of like how are they thinking internally about these controls and safety. And as we know, they've had a really hard time even maintaining stability amongst their safety teams. So that's something that I think still needs to be developed so that we understand what's happening. So now I do want to be fair. The legislation is only like 8 days in its journey right now, but it's moving fast, and there is a lot of scrutiny, and there's a lot of intention for that is focused on not being careless. But it's what people do when something visibly breaks and how we respond to what feels dangerous. That's when we can really think through this from a sense of systemic signal assessment. When your evidence is just a headline, but we're not talking to the people closest to the room, like what was Hugging Face reaction to being hacked by this AI tool, right? And I'm sure that this is probably not the first time that they've had a breach. What would they have preferred in the process? when the AI tool escaped the sandbox, what was the protocol internally for the organization? What did they do? What did they try? What was the responses? Those are the kinds of like listening and learning and not having accusations, so that we understand what information is actually available to help with the decision making. Okay. Now, when it comes to designing for everyone centered design and people facing the highest barriers, we're only talking about a few companies who have over $500 million in revenue and running models above $100 million in training compute, right? So, what sits outside of that is every hospital, every health system, community health center, every clinic that's fine tuning a model, every downstream developer, right? What's not being considered is language access, disability, aging, low resource settings. None of that is being addressed here. So ask yourself, who faces the highest barrier in an AI governed health system, right? Or in processes where AI is functioning as a decision maker. We've already seen this before in the insurance space, where hospitals are using AI to help them bill. Insurance companies are using AI to help them process claims, and we're having what we call AI wars, right? Now, it's not open AI that's in that space or any particular large language model, right? The person who's feeling that pain is the patient whose first language isn't English, whose voice was barely in the training data, who's relying on AI assisted decision and doesn't know that an algorithm just shaped whether that person got care, right? This bill just regulates the lab, the raw scientific innovation frontier edge of AI. But we really need to consider what happens downstream of that in a clinic, right? The next pillar is ecosystem alignment. So make sure that the solution holds across the whole living system from the person at the center outward. Now, on this one, this is where it's important that every definition in the bill is framed around. We need to understand how the framing and the language is being centered, right? Right now, we're thinking about it, it's coming at it from the perspective of a single technology, right? These generative AI models. As you know, AI is being used in a lot of different capabilities and it's being deployed agentically. But where's the which capability do we really want to make sure that we're monitoring? Is it just one, or is it what comes from that, the derivatives of that, right? Now, one genuine bright spot that we do have is that the Department of Homeland Security must weigh whether a shutdown order could itself disrupt critical infrastructure before issuing it, right? So that is real systems thinking, and I'll give them credit for that. Because again, if I'm a hospital system and I'm using this AI model and it's helping me triage patients in my emergency room, some of nefarious actors using it, and now the whole thing is shut down, what does that do to my critical operations? So that is the thinking that I think is going into this a bit more as well. Now, there still needs to be more discipline around this. And this is where I think the healthcare industry needs to have those conversations in terms of, okay, as an industry, how do we respond? How do we react? What do we advocate for? Now, data sovereignty is the piece that I would say is not as much addressed in the data provisions I found, is like preserving the weights and telemetry after a shutdown order and preserving forensic records tied to any incident. But there's nothing on ownership, nothing on training data disclosure, nothing on benefit sharing, nothing on deletion. So the one data rule in this bill about the public is a rule that keeps information actually away from the public. And I understand that there's a security logic behind that, but there is a trade-off. The bill is really protecting the model's evidence and it's protecting the company's disclosure. It doesn't really say anything at all about the person whose life produced the data or who was impacted by that incident. Okay. Now, stewardship, staying responsible after the launch and holding the power to stop it. So that is what stewardship is. This is the bill aligns very much with this pillar. And this is the first like circuit breaker type of bill I've seen yet. There's a named authority, there are real penalties, but what's missing, the companies themselves have to monitor themselves. So reporting starts with the company. They have to first be aware. They have to have some sort of monitoring cadence, early warning signals, and that's what is going to then be reported. But we've seen some early cases of AI doing things and hiding its code and its behavior from developers, and they're finding it after the fact, right? So it's not always possible to see inside of AI and what it's doing. Okay. Now, let's talk about what's happening with the state of Massachusetts. Okay. So, both chambers now have moved AI safety language this summer inside economic development legislation, right? And there's roughly 75 million for AI alongside a legal duty for developers to identify and mitigate catastrophic risk. There's attorney general enforcement built into the bill and a requirement for public safety plans and audited catastrophic risk profiles. Okay, so now we're seeing the state of Massachusetts, and there's other states that have done this already. You have Illinois and California that have moved forward legislation, is now really stepping forward and putting in some thoughts and frameworks and guardrails around this infrastructure, and with funding to support some of this work as well. So that's something I'm going to keep watching. Which brings me to my last point. I want to extend an invitation to you to come and be part of an important conversation that's happening with Massachusetts healthcare leaders as the truck passes by. On September 25th, during Boston AI Week, we're going to be bringing 250 leaders into a room to talk about AI governance at this most critical time. We're watching what's happening at the federal level. We're watching what's happening at the state level. But what does that actually mean if you're a chief medical information officer, if you are a director of a department, if you are a chief medical officer, if you're a CEO, if you're a nurse, if you're a patient advocate? What does it actually mean to you, and how can your organizations be prepared to govern AI in a way that aligns with your strategy and still maintains health equity, preserving access, creating simpler workflows, removing friction from the lives of patients as well as staff? And this is going to be the place to have that conversation. It is a practice lab. So we're going to be introducing you to the SEEDS framework. You're going to have a chance to actually use it, test it, try it with real case examples in a community of peers that are also on an AI journey. And what I'm most excited about, prior to the event, we're going to be launching a pilot of the Listen First technology as part of this to get your feedback on where you are in your AI journey as an executive, as a leader, as someone who is building in the space. And we're also going to be getting perspective from patients as well. If you're a patient in Massachusetts, like I am, how are you seeing AI show up in your care? How are you using AI to navigate your own care? So we come into the room having the context of the leaders in the institutions and the patients that are being served by those institutions, so we can have a well-rounded conversation and discussion. Leaders will walk out of this with a 90-day action plan. So this is not a sit and talk and go back to business as usual conversation. This is we're going to have hard conversations. We're going to raise questions. We're going to give you frameworks and tools to think about. You're going to have an opportunity to write down your thoughts and say, okay, this is what resonated with me. Here's where I think we have gaps. This is what I'm committing to in the next 90 days. And it'll be a community of people who are in it together that are going to be working after the summit to hold each other accountable and continue upskilling and learning how we navigate AI. As I started this session by saying, I'm an AI optimist. I believe in its power and I know what it can do. I'm seeing it in my own life. And at the same time, we're watching AI do things that we didn't think it could do. And there's also incredible potential for harm. But again, AI is just a very, 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 very intelligent tool. And it can also even function as a companion in your workflow if trained around sovereignty. So there's lots of opportunity I don't want us to miss in this revolution, but there's also incredible responsibility to make sure that we're deploying these tools responsibly. Okay, so that's the end of the episode. Thank you for everybody who joined. I would love to get your feedback. Is this helpful? Is what I'm sharing news to you? Am I breaking it down in a way that you understand? Is it engaging? Are there other content you'd like to see? Again, the point of failure in action is for us to talk about what's not working in AI. We had a lot of that this month, but it's also to present to you. But there's ways that we can course correct, and there's a framework that we can use to do that. Seeds of innovation. So this is a space to really talk about failure, dive in, understand its implications, particularly for us in the healthcare sector, where we have the greatest potential for good, but also harm. So I hope that you will tune in. Again, it's every last Thursday. The scenery might change as I'm still in the full time nomad zone here, but appreciate your time today. Thanks for connecting. And again, drop your feedbacks, comment in the chat, hit me up in a direct message or email, however you want to get connected. So thank you for participating and being part of the session today. All right. That was fun.